My name is Habib Zargarpour, and I'm a creative director at Microsoft working on Xbox titles. Xbox One was a launch title, and the last game I worked on was Rise, Son of Rome, together with a partnership with Crytek. And I focus more on visuals, and my passion is things to do with real time. Specifically, the draw for me was the workflow and methodology on the film side and visual effects at the time where I left, which was 2003, was a very slow one. So typically dealing with frames that take an hour to render. If you want to see something moving, you have to wait overnight for all the processors to run it. And then during the day, you make guesses with the parameters that you're trying to tune, and then you still have to wait the hour or half hour or 20 minutes for the result. And so it's kind of like working on a very slow stop motion. You know, you need a completely different mindset to have a lot of patience, because you're going to have a couple of months to do this shot, or longer if it's R&D. And so that kind of pacing was frustrating, and I got glimpses of real time whenever I'd be either playing a game or I'd be running stuff, for example, the Perfect Storm boats and ocean simulations. Once we figured out a nice pipeline, we could get that to be near interactive, so we could actually perform the shots or watch them live. Same thing with the pod race. We were getting the Maya rigid body dynamics, and it was just starting to become more and more real time. And so that was the appeal for me, was, you know, to go somewhere where I didn't have to wait for the render. Just have everything be right there and, you know, be real time. And so that was the big draw. And it eventually, when the platforms transitioned from the first generation, you know, Xbox and the PlayStation 2 to Xbox 360, that was like when things really started to gel, and I was actually tuning shaders real time and watching in motion, you know. I found it really interesting to do the transition from film to games, and I learned a lot about each of them. In fact, it was a difficult transition, much harder than I thought. It's very tough to make games, and the constraints of real time. But I felt that there was some positive things that I'd learned from working on films that I could bring to the game industry, and vice versa. There was a lot that I learned working on games that I think films can benefit from. And so I've always kind of been interested in the difference between the two, and also how each industry can help the other. You know, there's a lot of big contrasts with, even though they're both to do with entertainment, a big contrast in how they're created and some of the challenges, but there's also parallels. There's a lot of convergence in content creation side of things, you know, storytelling, the emotional aspects. These are all things that overlap. So they do have a lot to have in common in terms of what they're trying to do now. You know, it's in many ways the early parts of it are very similar, because for both film and games, you're dealing with concept art. So you're imagining what the environments can look like using 2D concept art. And then once you start getting into more of what the space looks like, that's where it's a little divergent. Because for a film, you'd make animatics, and then you do your previs or your, you know, basic shot blocking or storyboards. On the game side, you might do storyboards if there's like a sequence involved that's story-driven. Sometimes they storyboard a gameplay moment as well. But what becomes interesting about the space is you have to mock up the space. We call it white boxing. So it's basically roughly mocked up. And then you have to experience it interactively. You have to immerse yourself in the environment and walk through it and see how it feels interactively, and look around and get a feel for the space and see if it's got the right pacing, if it's got the right scale. And it's almost like if you're a real architect and you're able to like drop down into your building and walk around it, you know, before it's built. And so, and you can't really cheat, because, you know, you're going to be able to look around and look in any direction. So maybe you might cheat with really distant things that you replace if you walk through a tunnel or something, but for the most part, everything has to be real scale. because you're going to be able to walk around it and look at it from any angle. So in that respect, it's closer to designing something in real life than for film, because then film, you're just cheating every shot you can. You move things around and just do it for the specific angles for the most part. So that's where it's different in the game, especially if you start playing it and then something's not working fun-wise, or there's too many enemies attacking you in a certain place if it's a fighting game, and then you end up changing the environment to accommodate the gameplay, because the fundamental thing is for the gameplay to be fun. Then the secondary thing is to experience story and emotion and those aspects of it. And so the design of this space has to cater to what emotion you want to give. In the case of Rise Son of Rome, we wanted Rome to feel really grand, and have it feel palatial, and just really play with the scale of the monuments. In the jungles, we want you to be claustrophobic and afraid, or make it really foggy. You can't see much ahead of you. So all these things are to make the player feel a certain way, but it's also how they interact with it, and that feedback loop is what iterates and changes the environment design. So it's really different. It can radically affect what you do if something that's designed isn't fun. One of the big areas for me, the most important one, is visual distinction. So I work on the visual side of things to make sure that the game has its own identity. Anything that's designed in the game really becomes unique and recognizable. So the design of the environments, the design of the armor, the design of the characters, the lighting, and then to finish off, basically, the color grading. All of those things contribute to something being unique. And in the case of Rise, for example, we would mix Art Deco and Roman design to get a really unique look. You can really see it in the armor. And that it's not just generic Rome, it's something ownable. So I get involved working with the artists on the teams from that point of view to really push the designs and make them be unique to that game, and then come up with how we could light the game and do post effects and all the different things that we could do to have it stand out on its own, basically to be really unique and recognizable. That's visual identity is really key. And it kind of goes all the way from the design all the way to the post effect.